So Malak here. She's Egyptian.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I've just come back from Egypt, and I must say I fully agree with what you're saying. The scenario is extremely black. I mean, it's there. One doesn't see a way out. Um, my big things have deteriorated very quickly, much more than I thought. I hadn't been there for a year. What I don't understand is who is behind, who is paying for Sisi today, and who's financing him. Obviously, the whole elite, as you call them, or the bourgeoisie, is in favor of Sisi. They're so traumatized by the Muslim Brothers that they are in favor of him, and the big masses are. So somebody is paying for him, and there is a campaign. The second thing that was very striking is the fear. And this is something that is new. For the last 2 years, there wasn't that fear, and people really are scared. They deny the scare. They say, no, it's only momentous, but there is a lot of fear. Thank you.
And then Giorgio. Wait for the mic.
My name is Georgia from the Federal University of ABC. Well, it was a very impressive speech. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. It's a little bit on the same line as Alberto. You didn't speak much the external forces, especially the moment that Mercy loses his support. It's a moment when you say he started hate speeches, but not only hate speeches inside. And it's about to invite the president of Iran, was saying on the Palestinians. So the idea we need the military for stability was also very strongly, I imagine, interest of Israel, interest of the United States. And so maybe that explains also why so rapidly he lost, and why so rapidly again the militaries were seen as the savers of the. It gives stability also again for the region. So I want you to comment a little bit on that and the financing of Saudi Saudi Arabia, etc.
So back to you. No, it's your turn.
Okay, I'll start first with the point of terrorism. Okay, the question of terrorism in Egypt, well, again, it has historical background. Egypt had known movements of Islamic-based terrorism in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Most of these movements were urban and rural. They were all over Egypt, and they have different organizations. But most of them, they stopped violence by 2000. The big majority of them, they renounced violence ideologically, and they said we were wrong and we now have new doctrines. Others, they said no, I mean, we stopped violence because we lost the capacities, and they joined Al-Qaeda, for example. Okay, or they didn't join the Qaeda, but they would say our ideology is correct, but we don't have the capacity to do it any longer. But now we have a new wave of terrorism, mainly in Sinai. Based in Sinai. We have radical Islamist groups emerging in Sinai, which started to emerge as early as 2004. And they did terrorist operations in Sinai 2004, 5, and 6. The most important vocal group, and these groups we don't have much information about them, and they are ever changing, but the most prominent one right now, Jamaat Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, or the Beit al-Maqdis supporters group, it was established 2009, 2010 under Mubarak, and from the very beginning it was claiming to be an anti-Israeli group, doing operations against Israeli targets inside Israel, and in Israeli targets within Egypt, most famously the gas pipelines. After the revolution, they bombed the gas pipelines. Under Mubarak, he used to transfer the natural gas. Egypt has huge reserves of natural gas. To transfer the gas to Israel on a very cheap, low price, subsidized. A huge case of corruption. Okay, and and it was extremely hated. I mean, that's an issue of consensus in Egypt against Mubarak regime by all opposition, Islams, non-Islams, everyone. So these group, they bombed, they blow up the pipelines 15 times after the revolution. Whenever the government repaired it, they blow it again. So their operations were mainly against Israel, and they had some support in Sinai. Now they do have popular backing in Sinai. Someone might ask, who are they? I would say the hardcore, the nucleus might be people from the Egyptian interior. But they still have support from the local grassroots in Sinai tribes for several reasons. historically, Sinai people had many problems. They have been marginalized by the government economically, economic neglect in terms of development plans. For national Egyptian government deal with the Sinai people as second-class citizens. They're not trusted. They are seen as unloyal to the Egyptian state. And according to law, for example, they're not allowed to own their lands for national security reasons, whatever. And in the Egyptian police was extremely brutal against the people of Sinai in the last 10 years of Mubarak rule. So this gave ground for popular backing of these radical violent groups. These groups were not really happy about Mohammed Morsi because they don't see the brothers as Islams. They believe that brothers, they are sellouts because they don't apply Islamic Sharia correctly, I would say. Okay, so they're not really Islamists. But still, they disapproved of the military coup because they believed it was wrong, unfair, and did a lot of crimes and massacres against the brothers. And also because they think that, yes, Mohammed Morsi is not Islamist, but still he's better to us than the military because at least he tolerates our existence. He does not crack down on us. He does not consider us to be terrorists. So after the coup, they started targeting the military and the police, Egyptian military and police. And so the military hit back. And Egyptian military and the Egyptian police, as usual, very brutal. So they use scorched earth tactics, demolition of houses, killing many innocent people, a lot of collateral damage in Sinai. So this made these radical groups even more radical. So they started attacking and making ambush to the police and military soldiers while they're returning back home, which is controversial on religious basis, by the way, because according to Islam, you cannot kill the enemy except if he's in combat. But if he's not in combat, even if he wears uniform, then you should not kill him. So the military soldiers, if they're going back home, you should not ambush them. But they started doing that. Okay, so they even crossing the red lines of the Islamist groups themselves. And after that, they started attacking the military headquarters and the police headquarters, knowing that the departments and the headquarters of the police lie in civilian vicinity. So they know that there will be civilian casualties. But they will say, okay, we know that, but we have sent the message that we are going to attack police headquarters, so you civilians, you need to avoid being in the vicinity of these places. Okay, and now they started targeting tourists, foreign tourists, and they send the message again that, oh, foreign tourists, you should not come to Egypt, or if you agree to come to Egypt, then you will bear the responsibility for that. Actually, I think the Jamaat Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis or the Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis group, I think right now is very much affected what's happening in Syria, especially the ISIS group, or it's called in Arabic Daesh, or the Islamic state in Syria and Iraq, which started in Iraq. It was a branch of Qaeda in Iraq, and then it split off from the Qaeda, and the Qaeda, they fired them because the Qaeda thought that ISIS is too extremist. So you can imagine how extremist ISIS is. Okay, and they went to Syria, and now they are by far the most most radical group in Syria. And they're even fighting their fellow Islamists even more than they're fighting the regime in Syria. I think the Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis group in Sinai are very much affected by the ISIS line, and they're following their ideology and their propaganda and their line of thought. And I think they have some members from the ISIS in the Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis structure. So I think the situation right now is extremely bad in terms of terrorism. Sinai is uncontrollable because of topography, because of traditionally the weak state presence there. You can't use the terrorism by definition. You can't really get rid of it. And the organization is able to recreate itself. And they transferred their operations from Sinai deep into Egypt, hitting Egyptian cities and even Cairo itself. And they even insulted the police. They hit the Egyptian Mudarat al-Amn al-Qahira, the Cairo Police Department, like the headquarters. They blew it up. So they are scaling up their operations, and they are, again, it's a Syrian scenario. They want to create their own mini state in Sinai, and they believe that they can do that. So I think the fallout of these issues in Sinai is very important to the situation in Egypt, because it gives justification, legitimacy for the Sisi regime, military regime, but not for forever, because at some point of time people will hold him accountable for the continuation of the terrorist threat. That's one thing. So that's about the organized terrorism in Egypt. There is one final aspect of terrorism right now, the unorganized, what I call the sporadic terrorism, or the freelance terrorism. Because of the crackdown on Muslim Brotherhood, the very famous, strong, centralized organization of the Brotherhood is fractured. And so now the group is very decentralized. And so you have a lot of members, grassroots, especially the young people, the youth, who right now lost any faith in democracy. They believe democracy has no merits. They have tried elections 3 times or 4 times, and the military intervened, canceling the results of the elections. So democracy is not the way out. Civilian struggle or peaceful political struggle is not the way out, because if you make a demonstration, the military will kill you. Right now, the military and the police, they shoot live ammunition on demonstrators no matter what they do, just by the very fact of demonstrating. So they will say, okay, we have no way except violence against the military, against the police. But most of these young people, they are doing, as I said, sporadic violence, not really organized. And it's kind of limited, primitive operations. And so up till now, for the time being, it's not associated with the organized terrorism, which is mainly the Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis group based in Sinai. No, actually, no. Actually, Hamas has groups like, well, Hamas in Sinai is the equivalent of the Brotherhood in Egypt. In Sinai, they have jihadists, in Gaza. In Gaza, they have jihadist groups as well. Salafist jihadist groups. And these groups are very radical, and they're attacking Hamas. They said that you, Hamas, are sellouts. You forgot about jihad, and you made peace with, you compromised with Israel, and you are not Islamists any longer. So they are fighting with Hamas and, of course, with Israel. And so they are kind of headache to Hamas government. These Salafist jihadist groups, you can compare them to the Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis group in Sinai, and they have a lot of logistical connections and human connections, ideological connections. But Hamas is not really happy with that. Hamas, the most important thing Hamas cares about right now is their power, solid consolidation of their power in Gaza, not violent operations against Israel. The Lebanization of Egypt, Lebanese model. Well, the most important foundation for the Lebanese model is the sectarian issue. The Lebanese society is divided on sectarian basis in different sectors. None of them has clear majority. And none of them has absolute unquestionable power. Some of them has more economic power than others. Some of them have more numbers. Others have more organizational power. They are geographically scattered. So the situation is very complicated. And you also have foreigners, Palestinians, Syrians. So the situation is, and Lebanon is a weak state historically. So Lebanon has its own sectarian ideological peculiar components. In Egypt, it's different. The society is not fragmented that way on a sectarian basis. And I think the Egyptian, I prefer not to say the Lebanese, well, in Egypt after the revolution, analysts were always debating this, whether Egypt will follow the Pakistani scenario or the Romanian scenario or the Turkish scenario, or the, I don't know, all types of scenarios. And I kept always saying, well, Egypt will follow the Egyptian scenario. It will create its own scenario because the conditions in Egypt are different from these countries. So I believe what's happening in Egypt right now, it's, as I said, the state is a Taifa state. It is, as I said, not functioning as a modern state. It has a crisis of legitimacy and performance, and the society is extremely exhausted but politicized. Overstrained, overstretched, but engaging. Okay, and I think this is a recipe not for the Lebanization of Egypt. This is a recipe for the creation of a new state, or the reform of the existing state, a re-reform of the existing state, if a political actor emerges in Egypt having the capacity to do that, and the popular backing to do that. And this does not exist in Egypt right now. So I think Egypt, what will continue in Egypt for the time being is the limbo, the vacuum, old failing state, but it's there because no one is capable enough of forcing it to reform or replacing it, and the society is deep, polarized, exhausted, and twisting, changing popular opinion in a very fast way. I think it's extremely spectacular to see how the popular opinion, for example, shifted regarding the Muslim Brothers, regarding the Islamists in general. 70% of the Egyptian voters elected the Islamists to the parliament in 2011. 2 years after that, these same Egyptians, they are asking for extermination of the Islams. So this shift, well, that's a metaphor, I mean, not real extermination, but I mean like real brutal, heavy tactics against the Islam, excluding them from politics. This shift in public opinion, it indicates that the society is really changing its public opinion according to events. So the situation is open for further development at the social level. As I said, the state, I believe it will not collapse. It can reform, or you can create a new state in place if political conditions necessary for that do exist, which is different from the case in Lebanon. The case in Lebanon, it will always remain like this, unless if all factions in Lebanon agree to change it, which is very unlikely. The external power, I think that was raised by both of you. The role of the external powers. External powers, of course, its role was important. The US, for example, from day number one, they threw their bet behind the brothers. The brothers and the old state alliance. Why? For two reasons. Well, the United States, they believe that there's some kind of change must happen in Egypt. Mubarak must go. You must have elections, electoral, at least the procedural aspects of democracy. Free elections, transfer of power, etc. And they believe that the Muslim Brotherhood are the best candidate to do that. Well, why? Well, there are some obvious reasons. They are the only candidates who can do that. They are the only available, strong, competent, effective political organization. And also the brothers are conservative and not radical and not revolutionary. And they don't believe in continuing or radical revolution. More important than that, the United States, since the 9/11 attacks, it shifted its policy on political Islam. In the 1990s, there was this argument made by some group of American academics and think tankers in the US, mainly the Georgetown School, John Esposito, John Vol, Yvonne Haddad, and others, who makes this. They make actually two arguments. The first argument is that Islamic movements are the true, authentic representatives of the authentic voice of the Muslim population. They represent the Muslim culture. So they are the voice of the Egyptian or the Muslim population. Okay? They're the popular movement. They represent the people by definition. That's one argument. The other argument is that the moderate Islamists are different from the radical Islamists. So if you integrate the moderate Islamists within the democratic system, they will be democratized ideologically, politically, organizationally, and socially. Okay? And so you should open the door for democratic inclusion of the Islamists. And this will overcome the problem of violence and terrorism. After 9/11, under the George W. Bush administration and Obama administration, they adopted this line of policy. And they believe that, if we allowed, they understood correctly that terrorism or Islamic radicalism in the Middle East, it emerged because of the dictatorship and the economic failures of the old regimes in the Middle East, which is true. So they believe that the answer to this is we have some kind of limited democratization of the Middle East, and the moderate Islamists should play the leading role here as new ruling parties. And actually they have no problem with the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood, at the end of the day, economically, they adopt the ideology of the free market. They are to the right of the economic spectrum. They're not leftists by any means. Also, the brothers are conservative socially, and they have no problem with the West per se. The only problem might be Israel, but still, Hamas, for example, accepted truce with Israel. So the brothers, if they are in power, they can shift their rhetoric, and then they can make good relationship with Israel. And so that was the American understanding. And they believe that in this case, if the moderate Islamists are in power, they're the only ones who can control and limit the power of the radical Islamists. The only way to control the radical Islamists is to use the moderate Islamists against the radical Islamists, because that's the only way. Because the only way to control, to defeat an external extremist ideological group is through the work of the moderate group within the same ideology. So that was the assumption. And the model here was, of course, the Turkish model. The AK Party, the AKP in Turkey, the Justice and Development Party in Turkey, which is an Islamic party compatible with the values of neoliberal economy, free market, democracy, pro-West, pro-EU, pro-United States. It created made economic recovery, impressive economic growth, economic development, political stability, and it wins elections and it's popular. So they believe that this model can be copied and emulated by Egyptian Muslim brothers in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria, and in other cases. So that's why they supported the brothers in the Egyptian politics. When the brothers started to do crazy things, and when the US started to discover that the brothers were not really the ones, the Egyptian version of the AKP, still the US were unhappy with what the military did, because they believed that should not be the solution, and the brothers should not be excluded from the vision, and they were completely unpleased. They were not happy with what the crackdown of the military on the brothers, because they believe, correctly I assume, that this will create more instability. So the US right now, it's not against the coup, because actually the real American men in the Egypt are the army, the military, because they're the recipients of the US aid. I think $50 billion went to Egypt in the last 30 years after the peace agreement with Israel, and most of the aid goes to the military, either as military aid or indirectly to the state, and then it goes to the general's pockets. Okay, so most of the American money here goes to Egypt, training, weapons, all of this still depends on American connections. So the army, the US will never really risk ending its relationship with the military, but they are pressurizing the military to change policy regarding the brothers. Who was upset with the American line the whole way? The Saudis. Although the Saudi Arabia was and remains the closest American ally in the whole world, I would say, even closer than Israel, but they didn't see eye to eye with their brothers thing. They didn't see eye to eye with the Americans on the brothers thing. The Saudis from the very beginning, they believed that, number one, Americans sold out Mubarak very fast, and number two, they believe that the Americans trust the brothers, and the brothers are not to be trusted. The brothers are a force of instability, and they are a force of threat to the American and the regimes in the Gulf. So the Saudi Arabia was against the American brothers line, and so the Saudi Arabia supported the coup. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates supported the coup. So it looks right now that Egypt becomes right now. There is a very good book by a British writer called The Struggle for Syria, Patrick Seal. He says that Syria in the 1950s was the battleground for struggle between two power blocks. United States on one hand, Soviet Union on the other hand, and two regional blocks as well. Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and so on. It looks that right now there is struggle for Egypt, that Egypt is the battleground right now for different coalitions. So you have United States, Qatar, Turkey. That's the not the anti-military, but that's the camp which is believed. It used to be pro-MB brothers, pro-brothers, and now they believe that what the military is doing is wrong, and must be changed. On the other hand, also Iran sometimes supports this side, because the brothers, they had a good policy of improvement relationship with Iran. On the other hand, you have the Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Russia camp. And this camp is totally throwing its weight behind the military, economically, as I'm saying. Okay, as I said, $21 billion went to Egypt in 6 months. And if you're familiar with the Gulf, they would not easily give this amount of money in 6 months. The Gulf regime's mentality, they will never give such amount of money. They're not that generous. But for them, it's a life or death issue, that the military regime must survive. And the scenario of the exclusion of the brothers and extermination of the brothers must survive, must succeed. For them, that's the issue of life or death. And actually, the problem here is that this line of confrontation, it does not 100% match the confrontation in Syria. In Syria, you have the Saudis on the side of the Americans, and on the side of the Qataris as well. Saudis, Qataris, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey, and US on one side, vis-a-vis Russia and Iran on the other side. So it looks that they are shifting roles here and there. So it's really very funny. Saudi Arabia, it supports the military regime in Egypt, saying that we are supporting it because we are against Islamic terrorism, or against terrorism. And it's very funny that the same Saudi Arabia funds the extremist Islamic terrorist groups fighting in Syria, including ISIS and Qaeda groups in Syria and in Iraq. Saudi Arabia supports these radical extremist groups in Syria and in Iraq. Although they hate them in Egypt, and definitely they hate them in Saudi Arabia itself. But they support them in Syria and Iraq because that's the only way to fight the Shias. In Iraq and in Syria. Syria, the Bashar regime is Shia, and the Shia is the Shia government in Iraq. Because the two regimes, the Bashar regime, the Assad regime in Syria, and the Shia regime in Iraq, both of them are allies of Iran. And Iran is the nemesis of Saudi Arabia. That's the Soviet Union with the Saudi Arabia. Or Iran and Saudi Arabia. These are the two counterpoles in the region. So actually, the external powers are like, I'll give you example how foreign influence right now is very complicated. General Sisi, up till now, officially did not declare his official nomination for elections. You know why? Because Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are not happy yet with this decision. They didn't agree yet on it. They still have problems with it. They believe that, correctly I would say, that if the military is in the forefront, they will be blamed for the failure. And this will be a very dangerous situation. So they would prefer Sisi not running, the military will not run for office, and they would prefer a figure from the old Mubarak regime, to Ahmed Shafiq, the guy who lost to Morsi in the presidential elections. This guy to be elected, and then he should rule the country in partnership with the military from behind the curtains. So that's the South. So the Sisi right now is trying to get the approval of the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates because they have the cash. If they stop the cash, the country will starve. Israel from the very beginning they were not happy with the American line because they believe that the Islamists, no matter how they try to be doves, they remain Islamists. And the Israelis believe that Islam is intrinsically anti-Israeli. And also the brothers in Egypt had close relationship with Hamas in Gaza. So the Israelis were kind of happy with the coup, and they're kind of supportive of the current regime in Egypt. Although they are kind of worried about the policy prospects of General Sisi. And I'll come to this point later when we talk about the who backs Sisi, the possible policies of Sisi. So that's the next question, the Sisi. Who supports the Sisi? Actually, that's a very good question. And actually, the power base of Sisi, or the military strongman, the Bonaparte in Egypt, is very varied, it's very different. It includes different types of people. It includes the Mubarakist people, the old regime people who want to go back to the old days, the Mubarak-style policies. And this includes the business groups, this includes the traditional faces, this includes the clients of Mubarak regime. Okay? And this includes the business class. And some of them finance the campaigns that you referred to. Also, it includes the state institutions. The state institutions, military, the police, and so on. And they support the Sisi because he is the kind of the state who will bring the state together and protect the state against the threat of democratization. Okay? But also he's supported by another type of supporters, pro-change supporters. And that's very complicated. Some people in Egypt are not necessarily pro-Mubarak or pro-old state, but still they support the Sisi because they believe that the Sisi is different. He is, as the Bonaparte, he will introduce some kind of changes, different from the Mubarak days. Changes in terms of new social public policies that will provide for social justice, egalitarianism, income redistribution, anti-imperialist policies. And this brings us to the point of Israel. People think here of Sisi as a new Abdel Nasser. These people. What did Abdel Nasser do? What's the most trademark about Abdel Nasser? Income redistribution, social justice, and standing up against the West. So some people believe that Sisi is the new Abdel Nasser and he will do that. Of course, that the Mubarakist people, the business class, will not be happy with this because this involves a strong role of the state in income redistribution, taking money from the rich people, anti-imperialist foreign policy, adventurous foreign policy probably. So you have different power bases supporting Sisi. So it's a very complicated situation. And that's one of the reasons I would say Sisi it's unlikely he will succeed because his power base is very different. So if you try to satisfy these guys, then you will lose the support of the other guys. And the whole point about Sisi, the whole point about the Bonaparte is his ability to bring different factions together. The moment you lose the support, the ability to bring the different factions together, the moment you are not a Bonaparte. You become a leader of one faction in the system. And then the conflict will reopen again. So that's why I think the situation for Sisi is more complicated than people would assume. The question of fear and scare, it's a question of terrorism. The military have no card to play with except the card of terrorism. Economically, the situation, as I have explained, the economic situation in Egypt is miserable. It's even worse. It got even worse in the last 2 years because there's no tourism, because of the political instability. No tourism, and no investments, and the growth rate is very low. So political instability, it makes the economy even worse. So no economic improvement. The state institutions are extremely, as I said, corrupted, incompetent. And and it's not subject to reform. 7 million employee, you can imagine the number. I mean, it's very hard to reform it. Okay, and they can. It's so prospects for reform are really very very limited. So the state remains incompetent and ineffective. Okay, and it's very known in Egypt, like policing, like Egyptian police, for example. They are killing thousands of people right now in the streets, but they do nothing against the crime rate, for example. Crime rate is extremely high. They do nothing about traffic, about order, law, enforcing law, policing. Do nothing about that. Extreme incompetency. Okay, public transportation, extremely incompetent. Okay, I'll give you an example. The most important vehicle transportation in Egypt is the microbuses and the tuk-tuks, which is imported from Thailand. Okay, it has the same name in Thailand, tuk-tuk, which is like a small vehicle like this. Okay, so these vehicles, the microbuses, mainly the tuk-tuk, they are the most important vehicle of transportation, especially in the countryside, rural areas, and in the poor neighborhoods in Egyptian cities. Tuk-tuks technically are illegal. So this means that the Egyptian transportation is illegal altogether. And they cannot be ruled and controlled by the state institution. If you go to the public squares in Cairo, I'm not talking about the urban slums, where there is no state at all. I'm not talking about the south, which is very marginalized. I'm not talking about countryside. Go to Cairo. Go to the big squares in Cairo. Ramses, Al-Ataba, Tahrir Square. They are totally occupied by street vendors, which is totally illegal, and spoiling the traffic and distorting the traffic and normal life. But the government cannot do anything about that. They don't have the capacity or efficiency to do that. So the state institution efficiency is declining. So what's the only card remaining to the military and the CC? Terrorism, of course. And it's not fabricated, it's real. There is terrorism. And it is a big problem. Terrorism in Sinai or inside Egypt. But my disagreement here with the regime policy is that their policy will not provide solutions for terrorism. Actually, it will escalate terrorism, not the exact opposite. But it's the only card, it ignites public scare and fear, and people will remain united against terrorism behind the regime, even if the police is incompetent. Okay, I mean, can you imagine that the Cairo police headquarters had been blown up by terrorists? So I think this is a very incompetency. So I think the interior minister should be fired. But no, he will not be fired. He will stay. And the Egyptian population, the middle class, they might admit, yes, Egyptian police are bad, incompetent, but we have no other option. We have to keep supporting them. Even if they're bad, they're not doing their work, but we have no other option. So that's why they ignite the wave of fear and public scare. And that's why if you go to Egypt, you have this logo in all TV channels, whether public or private, calls war against terrorism. It's like a logo, okay? So that's why I'm telling you it's a North Korea style of media. And you have this witch hunt against opposition. So it's war against terrorism. Till it changed recently because the head of the tourist business chamber, he told the government that, guys, we support your war against terrorism, but that's not really the best thing to do if you want to attract foreign tourists to this country. Because if they see war against terrorism, they will not come. And you need terrorism even more than us because it brings money, foreign currency to the country. So they changed it, I think recently, 2 months ago, they make it the battle for democracy, something like that. The battle for the promotion of democracy. God only knows what kind of democracy is this.
Actually,
Yeah.
I'm afraid we are getting kind of late, so
Okay.
I wonder whether we have time and energy from
I
all
have.
your end.
I have.
I know you have a lot of energy. So, but just I think it's a second round of very short questions. I think we still have time for, let's say, two more. Eduardo
Yeah.
Greif was, and you, and then we finish, right?
Your thoughts about Iran. Can it liberalize? Can it keep negotiating with the West? And what impact liberalizing Iran would have on Egypt?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't get it. What do you mean by liberalizing?
I don't know.
You mean the government? You mean the government?
The government,
The
yes,
government.
the regime, yes.
Okay.
Okay, then you behind.
Hello, my name is José Antônio.
Uh-huh.
I'm a researcher at University of São Paulo. I study Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Uh-huh.
I would like to know from you, do you foresee any stability in Egypt if this polity is constructed, as you said, it's a necessity of Egypt? Do you foresee stability without the inclusion of the Muslim Brothers?
Mhm.
Thank you.
So, you're done. So, back to you.
Okay. I'll start
Final
first.
remarks.
Okay, I'll start first with the second question. Well, I think no, there is no possibility for a successful political new polity in Egypt without the inclusion of the Islams. Let's say the Islams, not the Muslim Brotherhood, because you might have different forms of political Islam other than the Muslim Brothers. Why? Because that's a big political actor. They have at least 25% of the vote. And not just that vote, they are a big social constituency. They have, talking about millions of people. So you cannot really force them out of existence. They are there. And you must integrate them in the system. Otherwise, you face instability. But the problem is this requires conditions. And a lot of different terms and conditions on both sides. On the part of the Islamists, they are required to change their ideology, their discourse, their type of organization, apologize for mistakes, which is a polite word that they have done over the last period, and that's very hard to do because it means the disappearance of the Muslim Brotherhood as an organization and the appearance of a new Islamist actor. And the incumbent leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood will never accept that because they have vested interest in keeping the traditional forms of the Brotherhood as functioning as it is. Also, it needs ideological transformation, especially among the Salafis. The Salafis who have a real ideology. The brothers are very pragmatic. But the Salafis have a real conservative understanding, which they don't accept pluralism, equality, toleration, and so on. So it needs ideological transformation, which is still unlikely up till now. But it might happen in the medium range future, or in the long-term future. But till this happen, yes, the political system in Egypt will remain unstable. Whether it is the old system as it is right now, or a new polity established, still it will remain unstable if the Islamists are not included. On the part of the regime, they must give something to the Brotherhood. So there must be some kind of transitional justice, maybe change in the leadership on both sides. Like Sisi, for example, as a man, he became associated with the massacres. A lot of massacres are taking place in Egypt right now. I mean, thousands of brothers have been killed and 30,000 in prison, and really, it's really very brutal. So maybe if change in leadership involving Sisi and others, people brought to justice, so maybe this can accommodate the wishes. Because the brothers now have a sense of victimhood and vengeance, especially the young grassroots. So this needs to be accommodated by some concrete measures on the part of the military, of the state. The question of if there is any possibility, if I understood it correctly, if there is any possibility for the regime to negotiate with the West in order to liberalize or to be not really fascist.
No. He was.
Iranian regime?
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about Egypt. No, Iran. You're talking about Iran. Question about Iran.
What impact the situation in Iran might have on Egypt?
I see. No, Iran is a very complicated country. It's a political system which has very different plural institutions. You have a complicated policy of checks and balances. Like when people always say, you don't really know who calls the whistle in Tehran and who makes the policy, and it depends on different policies. Like the one who called the whistle on, let's say, agriculture policy is different from the one who do it on industrial. A different one do it on foreign policy or the nuclear issue. Okay, but still the most important role, I would say, lies in the hand of the religious institution, one faction in it, because the religious institution also has different factions, the conservative faction in it, and the military industrial complex in Iran, mainly the Revolutionary Guard, which again, when you hear the term Revolutionary Guard, you think of, as if they are like freedom fighters, guerrilla fighters or something. No, they are not like this. Revolutionary Guard became businessmen. They have huge industries, and they have strong military presence. The Revolutionary Guard in Iran is even stronger than the Iranian army, or the Iranian conventional military. So the religious establishment and military-industrial complex or the Revolutionary Guard have interest in keeping the nuclear option, or in keeping contention with the West, but within reason, of course, within reason. So it's still calculated. So they can reach a truce like the one have reached recently, a few months ago. Okay, so it will never really escalate up to the level of explosion, but will be always controlled. But they think of themselves as a regional superpower, and the only way to play the role of regional superpower is to antagonize the U.S. interests in the region. And they could not avoid it, because if Iran wants to be a regional superpower, this must be done in their regional sphere of influence, which is the Gulf countries, Iraq, and both of them are American spheres of interest. So the clash of interests between the Iran and the U.S. is inevitable. And Iran here plays with the China and Russian cards as well. So I would say Iranian policy with the religious institution and the military-industrial complex, they benefit economically from this. Okay, they gain a lot of money from keeping this policy option, and it gives them legitimacy vis-a-vis their own population. Because in Iran, the only issue which gives legitimacy to the regime and which has some kind of popular consensus is a question of there's a foreign policy, the nuclear issue, and standing up to the West. But anything else is divisive: democracy, human rights, religious rule, constitutions, everything, anything else. But this is the issue: the nuclear issue and the foreign policy provides some kind of legitimacy to the system. So if you neutralize this issue, then you will open the door for the erosion of power of these two big power centers, the military-industrial complex and the religious institution. Which is the symbol here is the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme guy, the Murshid. How this affects Egypt? Well, Egypt is extremely weak right now to play the role of a regional power on its own. And this has been the case even under Mubarak. Economically, it doesn't have the capacity to play an independent role. So Egypt has to choose which axis to ally with. Saudi axis or the Iranian axis, American axis or the Russian axis, and the different axes overlap with each other in different places and different issues. And that's what the brothers try to do. Brothers tried, for example, to sponsor the U.S.-Iranian detente that happened. Sisi is not really interested in that. He's more interested on the other side. The Saudi side was kind of skeptical of the U.S.-Iranian friendly relationship right now. So it doesn't really have much impact on the Egyptian policy, because the Egyptian problems right now are mostly domestic. And the clearest source of external influence is mainly economic. And it's not economic, actually. To be precise, it's financial. And when I say financial, I mean Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and United Arab Emirates paying the bills. As blunt as this. Paying the bills, paying the money for the cash. Giving the Egyptian government cash to pay for the imports of fuel and basic needs. Recently, Sisi made a visit to Russia to buy some new weapons, military weapons. Well, I think this visit is mainly for propaganda reasons, because 70% of the Egyptian army military weapons is still American. But still, he bought. I think the deal is in almost $1 billion or $2 billion. Who paid the bills? Again, Saudi Arabia. And I think that's a very rare situation in which one country pays the whole bill of military weapons for another country from a third country, which is really very strange. But it's only in the Middle East you'll find such kind of things, and especially from the Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia is the most important regional actor in the region, and I think and they have a lot of problems right now. They have internal power struggles, and the current generation of leaders in Saudi Arabia is extremely incompetent. And they don't know what they're doing, and they're mixing things with each other, and they have a lot of problems inside. And they're very their fear of the Iranians lead them to schizophrenic foreign policies. As I said, their policy in Egypt is very much different from the policy in Syria, and different from the domestic policy in Saudi Arabia, and different from the policy in Iraq.
All right, Arlene, I know you want to make a question. Would you mind to make it on a one-on-one basis, because I don't want to hold people any longer here. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ashraf. You have covered the whole ground. I'm impressed. Thank you so much. Hope you can come back again
Inshallah.
here in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thanks.